Hello. Good morning. My name is Ruben Parra. I am the director of the Office for Teaching, Learning, and Assessment. I'm also a faculty member in the Department of Chemistry. And I'd like to start by thanking you all for coming today to this magnificent event, which has become a tradition in DePaul, our Fall Forum, right? This year's Fall Forum revolves around race and social identity in the classroom. Certainly a very important topic and very timely topic, right? One that we encounter on a regular basis in our profession. One that is very much in line with the mission of this university that invites us to embrace diversity. First-generation students, students coming from different socio-economical and ethnic backgrounds. Our mission guides us to do good with respect to these challenges that we encounter every day. But as St. Vincent de Paul has said many times, it's not enough to do good, we have to do it well. And our events like this that help us build the capacity to do good well. So I'm very much impressed by the attendance that we have today. This speaks volumes of the commitment that we all have to live up to the expectations of the mission of our university. To introduce our keynote speaker, we have Dr. Elizabeth Ortiz, our Vice President for Institutional Diversity and Equity. And she joined DePaul in 2002, if I'm not incorrect, yeah? And with over 30 years of experience in the field, Dr. Ortiz is a much sought out consultant, lecturer, and workshop presenter. And her extensive work includes areas of diversity and inclusion for faculty, students, and staff, as well as raising awareness of Latino representation and advancement in all aspects of higher education. So now I let Dr. Ortiz introduce our keynote speaker. So Dr. Ortiz.
Good morning. How is everyone today? Good? Good. Well, it's my pleasure to open up and welcome our keynote speaker and also welcome all of you to this forum. Today's theme is race and social identity in the classroom, and I think this is so important. It's reflecting what's going on today, what's going on in our own campuses, and how we as educators dialogue around issues of race and identity and how we make more inclusive classrooms. It is always my job when I open up, or I feel it is my job, to say thank you. The committee doesn't know that I'm going to do this, but I know this committee has been working very hard for the last few months putting this together for all of you. So I would like them to stand and be acknowledged for the work for this program. Our chair of this committee was Aaron Sella, Ruben Parra, Joe Oliver, Katie Botsich, Sarah Hernandez, Michael Riley, Michael Lynch, Molly Cannelli, Jen Sweet, Matthew Pearson, Bernard Beck Winchutz, and Jose Perales. Let's thank them for the work that they've done today. Thank you for all that you do, and thank you to all the volunteers that made this event possible. The Fall Forum is jointly sponsored by the Office for Teaching, Learning, and Assessment, but it is also part of the President's Diversity Signature Series. Additional partners that sponsored this event is Student Affairs, the University Center for Writing-Based Learning, the Student Government Association, the Office for Institutional Diversity and Equity, and Faculty Council. They all contributed, and we thank them also for their role. You know, it's my role as Chief Diversity Officer, I do want to give a plug, because across the country, as I talk to educators, as I talk to our students, and I talk to our faculty and staff, What people are saying to me is, Liz, we're concerned about the polarized environment that we're living in. What we're concerned is that microaggressions are going on in the classroom. What we're concerned is we cannot have civil discourse around race and what it means to be who we are. And that they feel if they speak up, they're threatened. And if they don't speak up, right, or when they do speak up, they're seen as threatening. If I voice my concerns, then I'm a threat to you. So I think this topic is so timely. So I hope today we learn how to balance all of these difficult things. But my commercial's over, and it's now my great pleasure to talk about Dr. Terrell Strayhorn. Dr. Strayhorn is the founder CEO of Do Good Work Educational Consulting, LLC. He is an internationally recognized student success scholar, highly acclaimed public speaker, and award-winning writer. He has given hundreds of invited keynotes and lectures at more than 500 universities and conferences worldwide. I have to tell you, I told people he was coming to DePaul, and they were like, he's great, he's amazing. So you've come very highly recommended. He maintains an active and highly visible research agenda focusing on major policy issues in education, student access and achievement, issues of race, equity, and diversity, impact of the college on students and student learning and development, and his most popular book, College Students' Sense of Belonging, A Key to Educational Success, has won a book award and sold copies nationally. Also, I want to make sure that you stay until the end of the event because we're going to be raffling off his book. So please, without further ado, help me welcome Dr. Terrell Strayhorn.
Thank you. And a wonderful round of applause for Dr. Ortiz, please, for that wonderful introduction. And all of the opening comments from both Dr. Ortiz, Ruben, others. It's my great pleasure to be here this morning and to have the opportunity to talk with you about, I think, as was mentioned, a really important issue. One that is, not only does it have a history for forums like this, and certainly have a history in social domains like education, but one that I think will become even more important, as I sort of implied last night at dinner, as weeks and months and years to come. It is, in fact, the way in which I organized my talk this morning. I could give the talk without ever mentioning anything that's happening just outside that glass window. I don't know why you would, but there are lots of things that are happening in society that influence colleges and universities in ways that are somewhat unprecedented. I don't know that I have not lived to see these days. If my grandmother were still living, she could tell me about a time when the political and social environment was similar to the way in which the world operates today. So I'm going to try to move through a lot of comments. Like any good speaker who's also a professor who's spent any time thinking about these matters, I came prepared with tons of material, way more than I will ever be able to cover in the time that is allotted to me. In fact, my hope is that maybe I'll get to like slide 1 and then I'll just lose track of time because we'll be so engrossed in serious conversation. But my guess is we probably won't happen. So I have a couple of things I want to share to just organize some thoughts, share some themes, maybe even to provoke some thought in you. And later today, during the workshop, I hope to pull together these threads that I'm going to offer this morning in a way that really focuses on what can we do in the classroom and what do we know from research that works in terms of working with students. That's going to be the afternoon workshop this morning. I'm going to think more big picture, research insights, provocative thoughts, leave you with lots of questions, and then we're going to have a little time for Q&A after I finish up, and then we'll segue into an interview where one, there are prepared questions that will be asked of me, and then certainly there's time for the audience to use their technology and engage in raising questions. So my best advice for you is hang on to your hats and your seat, get excited, get more coffee. The more coffee you drink, the better I am. And more importantly, as I move through, every thought or question that you have, log it somewhere. If you're a person who's like me and likes to write, you can pull out a sheet of paper and take notes and write down your questions, because if we don't get to them in this session, we'll get to them in the interview or maybe in the workshop later. If you are a person who likes to use your technology, I've already started and joined with the forum as well as DePaul, putting some things on social media, on Twitter and on Instagram. And so if you want to join us there, here's the information for that. And I used your hashtag, FFTL DePaul. So if you want to join us there, log thoughts and questions. It's a great way to share information with those who can't be here this morning. Now, with that out of the way, before I get too far into my opening comments, I want to just say special thanks also to the committee. I know that it takes a lot of work to put together forums like this, and certainly to work with, fun-sized presenters like myself who keep very, very busy schedules to make sure that I show up where I'm supposed to show up. And, and as if we needed anything to complicate this, yesterday, the Cubs played. Now, according to social media, that's all I want to say about that, right? Okay, so the Cubs played last night, and I arrived just in time for the game, although I wasn't going. I was actually going to meet Aaron and some folks at dinner, and as I got into my Lyft, I didn't notice this, but as I closed the trunk of the Lyft driver's car and got in, he said, oh my God, I love your hair. And I thought, oh, good, okay, I love my hair too. So he said, so are you here for the game? And I said, well, what game? And he said, no, you're not here for the game. And he said, well, just looking at you, you look like you're a rapper or like a singer. Are you here to perform? And I thought, geez, yeah, I'm here for the right reason. This is exactly what we need to talk about. Race does still matter, right? I said, no, I'm not a rapper, although I do like to sing. I'm a professor. And he said, yeah, right, no, come on. And I said, no, really, I'm going to go and speak at DePaul University tomorrow. And he said, well, did you notice on the trunk? And I said, no, I didn't notice anything on the trunk. He said, I graduated from DePaul. And I said, yeah, this is exactly why I'm going to DePaul tomorrow, to speak to people about the importance of race, about the importance of identity. Thank you. And of course, once I got on my way to the restaurant, we realized that traffic was horrible. And so after an hour and a half of being on the road and people being gracious, we was able to join with some folks last night for dinner to sort of set the segue for this morning's talk. So I do want to say special thanks to Aaron. Round of applause for Aaron one more time, please. And to the entire committee, Ruben, I know that my team worked directly with Aaron and others to plan this. Also, Sarah is in the room somewhere. Round of applause for Sarah. Is that her? Yeah, come here. Round of applause for Sarah, please. Thank you, Sarah. Sarah picked me up this morning and made sure that I got here safely, and we had great conversation in the car. So now to get started then, I am still Terrell Strayhorn, and I'm excited to be here. This is what I think we're going to think about today. Today, I want to think about race, and I want us to think about race and racism. I want us to think about not only what I'm going to share in terms of the history and the research about race, but I'm going to also push us to think about our own identities. How do you think about race? How do you think about yourself as a racialized person? What role does race play in your life? And if you're thinking already, well, it really doesn't, then we're going to need a little bit more time today together in order for you to get where I need you to go, because race does matter. In fact, I would call this talk Race Matters, except it's so obvious, I think, that it matters when you look at the research and when you look at society, when you look at colleges and universities, even wonderful universities like DePaul, that I don't know that we need to call it that. I think it's the fact that it still matters, because we now live in a time where many people, even in higher education, walk and talk and breathe and act as if we operate in what's called a post-racial society. The illusion of a post-racial society should evaporate or have left the moment I told you what my driver assumed I did for a living. It is meaningful that my Lyft driver, who's a wonderful, openly gay white male, openly gay white male. So this idea that people who have marginalized identities understand all marginalization is false. Already into my talk. But an openly gay, lovely white male graduate of DePaul University assumed that a young black male with crazy hair, who's the fun size, and all rappers are not the fun size, but is a rapper. And the reason why he did this, which makes him very much like a woman who I met in Boston's airport, Logan Airport, 2 years ago, who made the same assumption based on how I was dressed, is problematic. It's problematic because it's based on a stereotype. Stereotypes are not the same as lies. Lies are always false. Stereotypes are problematic and challenging and difficult because there are times when stereotypes are true. The belief that a stereotype is based in is true. There are black rappers in this country. And there are probably some black male rappers who have crazy hair, although I think it's cool hair, and who are fun size. Fun size simply means that as I was at the University of Wisconsin giving a keynote, at the end of my keynote, welcoming all their incoming freshmen, we had Q&A, and the Q&A was set up so there were microphones all around the room like this. And I said, all right, I'm done with my talk. Anyone who has a question, run to a mic and ask me. A young man jumped down out of the bleachers, ran down to the mic very quickly. I noticed him because of all the commotion. He got to the mic. He said, Dr. Strayhorn, I want to ask the first question. I said, yes. He said, me and my whole group over there, we've been thinking the whole time you've been speaking. I looked over, about 12 young people raised their hands. I said, okay, what's the question? He said, are you an adult? And that's what happens when you're the fun size. The cool thing about being the fun size, other than people often assume that you're way younger than you actually are, is that your clothes last you a lifetime. I bought this blazer in kindergarten, I bought these pants in second grade, and they have lasted me for quite some time. But the other problem when you are person of color, young, also built, our physique, our physical build, when all of those things intersect, what they do, beyond just create who we are, what they do for us in society, especially this society, is they create the possibilities for us. So that people look at us and determine, if I look at him, he must be a rapper. I've hardly ever met a person who walks up to me and says, you must be a professor. In fact, I've never had it. I've been a professor for 12 years, and I've worked at really wonderful universities. But interestingly enough, if you go back into the 70s, there's a publication in Science. It's a study of middle school students. The researcher has a question, and it's looking at the perception of scientists. And he asked the middle school students, describe a scientist. And the students say that when they think about the word scientist, here's what comes to mind. White, male, old, lab jacket, pocket protector. He has an ugly wife, and his kids hate him. Published in Science, one of the most, arguably one of the most powerful journals in all of our disciplines. In the 70s, that's what people thought scientists looked like. So if you've wondered why we spent so much time over the past decades trying to broaden participation in science and change the face of science, it's because that's the dominant perception. Why is that problematic? One, it's problematic because it's not true. That's not what scientists look like. Scientists also look like this, and like all of you who identify as scientists. Second reason why is because it creates, restricts the possibilities and opportunities for people. As long as that is the dominant image of scientists, people will never look at women, people will never look at students of color, people will never look at people who have visible disabilities and think there is the next scientist. It restricts possibilities or opportunities for people. But the third reason why, and I think it's the one that is far more damaging in a way, is it diminishes the potential of human talent to change society. It is that we look over and gloss over, very much likely, the person who has the cure for the disease that is still troubling us. because we don't see that person as a scientist. We don't see that talent as important for educating and getting enrolled in a program or getting into a graduate program, so that ultimately this person has the skills that they need in order to do what we need them to do. In other words, there's a history for all of this in society. Back in the 70s, we were thinking about perceptions of race and racism. And there's good reason for it. At that time that piece was published, it was only about 20 years after some really watershed legislation that changed American society for better. I'm not familiar with, but I'm familiar with these pictures. But I had a grandmother who often talked to me about the world when I could not have been your keynote speaker. In fact, in the month of February, when teaching, my students would tell you, every week we have a moment of silence in the month of February. Why? Because if you don't know this, and I see lots of people taking notes, that's really, really good. You may want to write this down. I'm black. I've been black my entire life. If you didn't know that, write that down, tweet it, twerk it, whatever you want to do with it, it is not going to change. I've been black my entire life, and I think it's really important for my students. I've always worked at predominantly white institutions. I think it's important for my students to understand that just about 50 years ago, I could not have been their professor. Couldn't have been their advisor. In fact, I couldn't have been their classmate. If I wanted to learn the information that I'm now hired to share with them, at best, I would have to risk life and limb to sit outside of a window like that and listen in on the lectures, hoping that no one would find me, and more importantly, hoping that I could even understand the things that I was hearing. That's the society that we live in. That's the history of what we're seeing pop up all across this country at colleges and universities. And we have known for some time that while de jure segregation, that is the law then invoking segregation, the law supporting segregation, that is the segregation of people based on race, while that is no longer legal, that is no longer the case, we don't have laws that permit discrimination on the basis of race, or for individuals to be separated physically, geographically on the basis of race. We do have, I think, very clear evidence that we still live in a time of de facto segregation. Some of the data I'm going to share from education, higher education, is what I would use to illustrate that while we are not legally segregated in society, we certainly operate in a society where we are separated. We are not only separated in higher education because we have predominantly white and predominantly black schools, and I can say that, and you know what a historically black college is, and you know that DePaul University is not one of them. The fact that I can state that, it takes on meaning, is part of that de facto segregation. We get it. And we're all good people. And at the end of this talk, I was telling Sarah in the car, I normally don't get nervous at talks, and I'm not nervous at all. But I have to tell you that this kind of conversation is one where when I did my TED Talk back in 2012, the little 3 names they assigned to me after my talk was professor, public speaker, and provocateur. We talked about provocateurs last night. I don't think provocateurs are jerks. I don't think provocateurs are rude. I don't think provocateurs incite violence. I think provocateurs provoke people to think. I think that they have to be courageous to say things that push people and individuals and crowds in a direction that they must go. So right now, I'm being very courageous in this talk to say things the way that I need to say them in order for us to get where we have to go in this conversation about race. My Uber driver or Lyft driver like yesterday said to me, I don't think we should really talk about race so much because race doesn't matter. Race matters a lot, still matters a lot. Secondly, the reason why most people think we shouldn't talk about it is because they're uncomfortable talking about it. In fact, most people fear conversations about race. A really interesting public article that came out in the Journal of Diversity in Higher Education shows that many faculty report of all the things they'd rather not talk about in the classroom, race is one of them. Fearing PhD, award-winning, grant-winning faculty member, top of their field, published many times in the highest ranking journal in their discipline, but in the classroom, fearful to engage conversations about race. And the reason why is why I said earlier, I want you to think about your personal identity and your personal evolution, how you think about these issues. The reason why is because we really don't have a lot of practice doing this very well. How many of you in here, by a show of hands, grew up in a family or a household where you were told not to talk about race, not to talk about race in politics? We don't really talk about race in politics. Don't talk about it at the dinner table. It's impolite to talk about race in politics. See lots of hands up, see some nods and some hands, okay? So the reason, growing up, what it does is, first of all, it shapes our mindset about the topic. When we're told don't discuss things, we don't talk about it, it's impolite. We start thinking about things as if they're taboo, off limits. And then when we get into the classroom, well, what it does, if nothing else, it robs us of the opportunities we need to practice engaging in conversations about race. And the reality is this: most of us in this room then, if we have not spent a lot of time talking about race and difference, we've missed a whole lifetime of preparation for the very thing that we're being asked to do now in the classroom, or asked to do now in our workplace, or asked to do now in our various jobs. And for the students in the room, the very thing that you're being asked to do in the classroom or through assignments. How do you do it when you have no script for it? It requires you to develop new skills, understanding that you will make mistakes, being patient with yourself and patient with other people. We'll come to some of that later in the workshop, some ground rules about it. But this idea that we are no longer segregated is at best an illusion. And the idea that we are integrated, I think, also then operates as an illusion. We choose to be together. We are not forced to be together. And then even when we are together, air quotes, many times we are separate. By a show of hands, how many of you in here are sitting beside someone that you knew before you walked in the room? Keep your hands up if you chose that seat. Look around the room. Hands up, look around the room. This is what happens all the time. It's voluntary segregation. It's what happens when, if you've ever read the book by Beverly Tatum, Why All the Black Kids Are Sitting Together in the Cafeteria. It's what happens when we operate under the illusion of integration. We get into a place like this and we say, oh, look at us, we're all together and everybody's so different, everybody's so diverse and we all get along. The only thing we need to do is join hands and sing Kumbaya. But in fact, what happens in these kinds of settings is we enter the space and we do what every person does. We look for the path of least resistance. Who's the person I know? Who's the person in my department or in my office who's already here? Where's my bestie? And we sit beside them, and we avoid engaging people who are different from ourselves. For the students who are in the room, I say this. If you ask employers, what are you looking for in today's college graduate? Go to Money Magazine, Forbes Magazine. There are lots of stories all the time about this. There are 9 traits that employers say they're looking for in recent college graduates. Things like they want college graduates of DePaul University who can communicate effectively. They want graduates who are proficient users of technology. Interestingly enough, the most recent story I read said that employers are looking for college graduates who are creative and can imagine. And they didn't specify a major. Why? Because the problems of society, the problems of industry and business require a skilled worker who can still think outside the box, who can still ask interesting questions to solve really ordinary problems, someone who's creative, someone who's imaginative. One of the questions I have for us on a separate note in higher education is, how do we make sure that we educate and train students through a curriculum and a tradition and the canon, and also preserve creativity and imagination in them? How can they learn citation styles, whether it's MLA or APA, but also preserve some form of creative and imaginative writing? I think all of this is pressed upon us in higher education. But for the students in the room, they want you to have those skills. The other skill they want you to have and be able to possess and demonstrate is an ability to work on diverse teams, a demonstrated ability to work with people who are different from yourself. So if you're a student who comes into a room like this and you look for your best friend and you only sit beside your best friend, or you only sit beside those people who you already know, and you avoid the people who are tall because you've always been suspicious of tall people, you avoid people who are left-handed because you've never trusted people who are or left-handed, then all you're simply doing is robbing yourself of the experience you need to prepare yourself for the career you want. Said again, you are robbing yourself of all the preparation that's necessary for you to become the great person you're designed to be. That's how critical it is. So I think we should walk into rooms like this and say, hi, Koya, I already know you, so I'm going to go over here and sit beside this person who I do not know, because I've got to figure out how to get comfortable being around people who are different, how to start conversation with people who I know nothing about, how to be comfortable around tall people because I'm suspicious of tall people, and the reality is this, someday I might have a client who's a tall person. College should be that training ground where people experience the kinds of conditions they need to not only become productive students who earn their degree and do well and graduate in somewhere between 4 and 6 years from college, but college should also be the place where people experience those conditions they need to become active participants in democracy. Most in universities like DePaul University and many other leading universities have in their mission statement that the university is designed to produce knowledge and produce informed learners, but most importantly to produce global citizens. That's an interesting construct. One, is an interesting construct because that is clearly a learning outcome that we design. Students don't come to, I hate to tell you, but students don't come to DePaul University to be global citizens. They might become one, but they don't wake up Saturday morning in downtown, south side of Chicago and say, you know what? I really need to be a global citizen. What they do is they come to college to get a job. And then it's our job to help them understand that there's more to the educated person than the vocation, the job. And secondly, that job takes on greater meaning, a life's work, when it's also then married with or partnered with these global competencies, these global understandings. What does it mean to be a global citizen? And what does it mean for our universities to exist to produce global citizens when I'm not sure right now we're doing a very good job producing local citizens? Can you just graduate from DePaul and get outside and treat people on this street nice? Talk to people who are different from yourself. Pay your taxes. Get a job, and then once you get that job, also be engaged in some sort of civil service or community service or service learning where you're giving back to people and strengthening communities because of what education's done for you. That, to me, is what a local citizen does, not to mention a global citizen. That's what for students. For faculty and staff in the room, I think when we know that our classroom and our auditoriums operate as sites of exclusion, where there's just an illusion of integration going on, we have a responsibility. This is probably why I'll never be a provost, right? Because I say responsibility. So if some people say that's not a responsibility, they didn't hire me to deal with diversity. If I were a provost, I would say we did. But since I'm not the provost, I would say that if it's not a responsibility, we have an opportunity to maximize learning. And there's an impressive empirical base that suggests learning is maximized in diverse environments. Math, science, creative writing, art, dance, all of it is learned best in environments that are diverse. So if we want to achieve the goals that we've set for ourselves, I think we have to not only understand the kind of work we're engaged in, but understand that everything that we're talking about today has a history. And that history is not historical only. I would argue that we've seen and witnessed a resurgence of historic attitudes. And there's all the evidence in the world for this. Not only I graduated from the University of Virginia, so when the protests and the demonstrations kicked off in Charlottesville a few weeks ago, I was personally, I had a personal interest in that because I remember being in Charlottesville, Virginia. I remember walking down Emmett Street. I remember being in those spaces that were now being defiled and desecrated, that were now sites of violence, which for me were sites of enlightenment. I'm going to say it again. The juxtaposition is frightening. That the very same site that led to my personal enlightenment was now a site for violence. How is that possible? How is it possible that sites of enlightenment, spaces of empowerment, where education takes place, can be converted into spaces of violence? I think what we have to realize is that place and belonging is really important. But more importantly, it's not the mere place that empowers or educates a person. It's what happens in that space. It's what we do that matters. So when it comes to race, simply walking into the classroom, simply reading the book, simply watching the video does nothing for really empowering and enlightening and equipping students for society and for themselves. Simply being mere exposure to diversity really yields nothing. In fact, I could walk over to you right now and breathe on you all day long. The only thing that's going to happen is you might be a little warmer or a little cooler, depending on, well, it's probably because of the coffee, warmer right now. I could breathe on you all day long, but you will benefit nothing from merely being in the same room with people who are different. It's what we call representational diversity. It's what most institutions in this country do a great job of. We can open doors of access. We can increase the sheer number of students on campus. We can make sure that there are numbers and digits and people represented in the boxes. We can make sure that we have more Latina women. We can make sure that we have more first-generation students. Representational diversity, numerical diversity is what most institutions specialize in. Now, beyond that, though, there's this other form of diversity called interactional diversity. And that is when you take the representation, the mere presence of people, the demographic diversity that's afforded, and start to create conditions that bring people into meaningful and purposeful engagement with one another. Dialogue, debate, discourse, experimentation, learning communities, fraternities and sororities, clubs and organizations, mentoring. These are the mechanics. These are the mechanisms we use to drive that engagement. But when you bring individuals who are diverse together in educationally purposeful ways, that's what we call interactional diversity. And most research suggests that's the condition you want in place in order for learning to be maximized. Learning results from debate. Learning results from disagreement. Learning results from mentoring. So since we are all in the business of learning, maximizing learning, I would argue, and we're trying to do it in a way that really appreciates for who students are and what they bring, I think we understand the history. I think we start to think about then that's not only historical, there's a modern day context for this, and that these issues are not just the ones that are shown on the screen. Sure, these are, by the way, these are not, that whites only sign over there is not from the 50s or the 60s. It's current. There are companies that manufacture bumper stickers, signs of this nature, that pop up in high schools and colleges and universities all over the country. The part that really troubled me the most about what happened at my alma mater is, as I looked at the screen, it's also not the men of the 50s who are doing this. It's today's college student, today's high school student, today's student who could have been in college, who's out there with tiki torches and also stickers, recreating, reproducing a society that all of us have no desire to return to. So race still matters. There's a historical context for it, but that historical context has present day manifestations in the way that we've been talking about. And this is the interesting thing, is that we know that not only does race matter, but we have to deal with this whole notion of race. So race is a social construction. Now, I have to tell you, I was an undergrad taking a sociology class when I first heard this. I remember writing it down in my notebook, and I thought, that's great. Yes, race is not real. And I could have just spent the whole day leaping through, fields. But then I realized that race being a social construction doesn't mean that it doesn't matter. Race matters. Race is a social construction, and by that, when people write it, when they talk about it, what it means is it's not biological. And and despite the fact that I say that, I meet people all the time in Q&As and getting more coffee after talks who say things like, well, but have you read the most recent research that seems to suggest race is not biological? It's not. To all of biologists in the room, it's not. There's no collection of genes that have ever been studied that separate me and people who are like me from people who are not like me. That's critically important for us to have that as a starting place for this conversation. Stop thinking that we haven't properly tried the experiment. Stop thinking that there was contamination of the test tubes. Just accept the fact and the principle that race is not biologically determined. It is socially constructed. By that, we have to admit it is socially constructed. That sounds really intellectual and really exciting and really out there until you realize it is socially constructed by us. We are complicit in this manufacturing of race. We use it. There are people who believe we need it. We use it to make decisions about the distribution of resources. We use it to explain social phenomenon. We use it as a way of privileging some while oppressing and marginalizing others. And even if you're saying, I don't do that, I'm not talking about you specifically, although sometimes I am, because we all do it. If you don't believe me, go down to either O'Hare or Midway, catch a plane to New York City, go down to Broadway, watch a play called Avenue Q. In Avenue Q, there's a song called Everybody's a Little Bit Racist. It's a cute song. You can find it on YouTube. You don't have to go to New York, although I do recommend New York. And this song, Everybody's a Little Bit Racist, helps us understand in a way that we can embrace everybody does it. Everyone makes decisions every single day about people and their potential and their background. What does a college student look like? I was on a campus one time. I checked into the campus hotel, and the woman looked at me. I had on like ripped up jeans, a cute little shirt, and whatever else I had on, sunglasses. And she decided that day she asked me, was I trying to get a job there at the hotel? She thought I was a student at the institution trying to get a job at the hotel. I said, no, I'm the keynote speaker here from another campus, whatever. So I started talking to her. I said, hey, by the way, she was like, well, I kind of knew that you weren't from here when I saw you. That's why I was wondering, because you don't look like one of our students. I said, what does one of your students look like? It's a really important question for all of us to think about. What does a college student look like? What does a DePaul University student look like? And we can all answer it. Even if we don't answer it publicly, we can answer it privately. And whatever comes to mind, that's the image that we're trying to work on, so that it becomes anyone could be a DePaul University student. Anyone could be a college student. Race is not determined biologically, it's socially constructed, and we give it meaning and we use it. So I think that one thing we have to know is that we have these, in the social construction of race, we all are complicit. And part of our complicity in it is that we either consciously or subconsciously make decisions about people. We have, all of us in this room, regardless of age, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, political affiliation, where we grew up, and the discipline or the major that we hold, all of us in this room operate and use conscious or unconscious, sometimes even subconscious, associations to make meaning of the world. In a moment, I'm going to show you a word. Some of you who are paying attention already know the word. When I click the word, all I want you to do in your best DePaul University voice is holler out whatever comes to mind when you see the word. Don't think too much about it. Just holler out on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Start hollering. Stop. All right. Now, if I were really, really good at creating PowerPoints, I would have created a PowerPoint. I don't know what it looks like, so if you're good at PowerPoints, talk to me afterward. But I want a PowerPoint that shows how many places I have done this exercise, how many people have now participated in it, given the number of places that I've done it. And regardless of where I've been, I was in San Diego, California, at a very large conference of maybe 3,000 people. I did it in Princeton, New Jersey, in front of like 300 school superintendents. I did it in Austin, Texas, at the University of Texas. I've done it so many, hundreds and hundreds of people have participated. Why is it that when people see this word in this country, the only race you ever hear hollered out is black? And the only gender or sex you hear hollered out is male. What's happened in society, in our lived experience, such that this word actually does have a race and a gender? The word thug on its own does not issue any meaning. It's simply 4 letters. We have created it to say thug. We have also created an understanding of what it means. But interestingly, along the way, we being us in this room, those of us outside the room, the media, politicians, have also helped us co-construct this idea that thug has a race and a gender. Why is that important? One, that is probably the most basic sort of quick illustration I can show you of implicit bias. Implicit bias are these automatic associations that we make, sometimes consciously, but most times implicit is unconscious. I've done it where I had a red background. I did it where there's no background. I do it where the letter's in brown. And people still say black, and they say male. No one ever looks at this word and says white female, Native American woman. The reason why that's important for this conversation is it signals that it still matters, and most importantly, hopefully it reveals to you that it's within all of us. Even those of us who are well-intended and well-read walk around with these associations. Now the question is, and the work for you, is what are those other associations that you have? What other words trigger images, race, gender, social class? Words like successful, college student, CEO, leader, valedictorian, smart, dumb, hardworking, lazy. All of those words start to receive an identity from us. And they're problematic because they get in the way of us educating young people. And my research, if it's done nothing over the years, it's shown me that, one, race is still significant, and it's significant even in education. This piece is one that was written years ago by Joe Fagan, then at the University of Florida, where he talks about race mattering in public spaces. One of the public spaces that he talks about in this piece is education, and that's probably where my work is. Now, you probably can't read those graphs from the back, but it's okay. I can help you interpret them, and then if you want to see them, just see me afterwards. I can send you a PDF of this. As long as you can see the colors, that's the ones you really want to pay attention to. This slide simply shows that college readiness is a concept that many of us who study post-secondary higher education pay close attention to. Some of the work by folks like David Conley suggests that there are 4 domains for college readiness. For a student to be ready to be successful at DePaul University or at any university, there are 4 sort of quadrants, domains of knowledge that they must possess. One of them is they must have subject matter knowledge or mastery, especially in sort of critical skills like English and math. English, literacy, math, numeracy skills are critically important parts of college readiness. Second, that individuals must know something about education. You know, to be successful in college, you have to know something about education, the rules of education. You have to have some knowledge of good grammar and writing skills, the kinds of things that are valued in education, the sort of mechanics of the field. Third, in order to be college ready, an individual must possess tacit knowledge. These are what people would have called soft skills back in the day. In order to be successful, they must have some degree of resilience, must be willing to study and work hard, have good study habits, must have a good sense of self-esteem. When you look at college readiness scores, and most of our institutions require students to take the ACT or the SAT, and the ACT has in it college readiness benchmarks that it publishes every year on its website. You can go to its website and find it. These national data suggest that still today, college readiness varies by race. This is true even when you control for social class and sex. That is, take a rich black kid and a rich Latino kid and a rich white kid, and the white student will always be more ready in terms of this score, more prepared, more likely to succeed in college than the other two. Race won't matter. I'm sorry, social class won't matter. Race will still matter. Even when you take a poor white student and a poor black student, the white student will still overperform the black student, controlling for, regardless of the effect of social class being the kind of resources that would have been available to the student in the home, the kind of resources that would have been available to supplement or complement what was going on in the classroom in high school, the kinds of experiences the student would have been exposed to. Social class is a very complicated construct or measure. Usually it incorporates exposure to like museums and the way in which the parent was engaged in the student's learning. Those won't matter as much as race in this country. Said differently, we still live in a society where the kind of education you actually receive and the quality of it is determined by your race. We live in a democratic society and work at really wonderful world-class universities where the education that we offer, the quality of it is still determined by the student's race. And that's what makes it unequitable, unfair. It should not be the case that a student who is born a certain race gets a certain quality of education, and those disadvantages accumulate over their lifetime. That's not fair, that's not equitable. That is what the motivation for this kind of work is. It varies by race, and as this slide shows, it varies significantly. Sometimes these scores can be 24 to 40 points. The other thing that we know is it's not only college readiness, how ready you are to succeed in college, the kind of courses you would have had exposure to in high school, but also in terms of college enrollment. It varies by race, with whites and Asians outpacing all of their peers. So even though students might go to really good schools and learn in really great spaces, they are least likely or less likely to enroll based on their race. This is interesting because there are all sorts of extensions of this. So we have about 21 million college students in this country. Of that 21 million, a third of them identify as first-generation college students. By the way, how many of you in here, by a show of hands, are first in your family go to college? A round of applause for all the first-generation college students, because I think this is really important. First of all, if you look around the room, we're diverse. And interestingly enough, first-generation college students go on to be first-generation faculty members and first-generation directors of admissions. And I tell all the first-generation students like myself this: just because we're first doesn't mean that we're going to be last. We need to reach back and help other people like ourselves and not like ourselves to get into higher education and to access this precious commodity that ultimately leads to a lifetime of advantages. College enrollment varies by race. We have 21 million college students. Of that 21 million, about 2 million of them are African American or black. Of that 2 million, upwards of about 1.3 million are black women, leaving only about 600,000 of them who would be black men. The reason why that's important for the kind of work I do is I have some studies that focus specifically on black men in higher education. The reason why is not just because I'm a black male, but because I think this is problematic, that black women outnumber black men in college by a margin of 2 to 1. Not problematic meaning that the black women are problematic. I mean, look at that sizable gender gap within a race. And by the fact that black women outnumber black men by a margin of 2 to 1, said differently and more directly, that black women outnumber black men in college does not mean that black women are, having the time of their life in college. They have no problems. They face no challenge. Black women need scholarship and research about their experiences. They need conferences. They need mentors. They need support. But the experiences of black women are not the same all the time as black men. When we start looking at race, one of the problems we have as social scientists, as researchers, is we often look at race in a very monolithic way, as if all black people are the same, all Native American people are the same, all Asian Pacific Islanders are the same. And we have an impressive body of research that suggests that is not the case. And we need to interrogate those experiences to understand better what exactly happens there. In terms of college enrollment, one reason why students who might be ready for college, prepared for college, don't go off and enter college has a lot to do with educators. We'll come to that in just a slide. Another slide. And then finally, race also matters when it comes to college completion. Even when you look at who completes, you see sizable differences by race, again, with African Americans, Latino Americans mostly being the smallest proportion of students who go on to graduate. Now, this is when you focus on race, and that is the purpose of today's talk. That's the purpose of this forum, is to really focus on race in association with other social identities. But let me tell you this. In 2008, I wrote a piece about black men, and at the end of it, I talked about black men in my study, experiencing college in ways that was oppressive, and they reported experiencing discrimination. And I concluded that of this sample I was looking at, this is true nationally, that 2/3 of black men who enter college drop out before they complete their degree. 2/3 of black men who enter college leave before they finish their college degree. I was writing that one day when I stopped for a moment and thought back to my days at UVA, and I thought about myself and Jeff with a G and Jeff with a J. These are other African American men who were at UVA when I entered. And then I jumped forward 4 years and realized that even in my own personal narrative, 2/3 of us did not finish. No one ever talks about the social consequences, the psychological consequences for the individual who makes it. Survivor guilt, even in higher education. And who worked with that student to understand how to navigate that space. That is also part of what we're dealing with here. Well, in that piece, I concluded that 2/3 of black men drop out of college, and that this was the lowest completion rate among both sexes in all racial groups. And while that is true, that is not the lowest completion rate of all of our students. About 3 years ago, I started studying foster youth. There are 400,000 foster youth in this country. Every single year, about 21,000 of them age out of the system. Upon aging out, 87% of foster youth say, what in the world? I need education, so like an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree. I need some credentials, some higher education in order to achieve independent adult living. 87% of aging out foster youth say, put me in a college or a university, help me get some skills so I can achieve independent living. 87%. And on average, less than 3% of foster youth ever earn a college degree. That might be the lowest. This is simply to show that, and by the way, some foster youth are people of color. Some foster youth are people of color born into poverty. This is intersectionality, as we talk about it in the academy, that no one lives in these boxes as if they are just black or just poor or just Latino and just living with disabilities. It's the intersection, not even really the addition, it's the intersection of all of these identities that come together and operate in this larger apparatus of power and privilege that really shapes what we're trying to work with in the classroom in a way that really helps us, I think, understand the challenges there. So I wrote this piece in 2009. It's about teacher expectations. The conclusion that this piece, I think, really adds to the sort of fodder what we have before us now is this, that in this study of teachers, this is a survey of teachers, and I asked teachers, hey, when it came to the following kinds of students, what do you recommend for them on average? Large numbers of teachers recommended to African American males to work, not to go to college, even controlling for their performance in classes. If you've ever had the opportunity to do research that somehow becomes so meaningful and personal that becomes almost like autobiography, I remember writing this piece up, and I paused for a moment, looked out the window, saw a bird float by or fly by, probably not floating, flew by. And I thought back to 12th grade. In 12th grade, I grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia. In 12th grade, I took calculus with my best friend, Jason. My 12th grade calculus teacher, her name was perfect for her. It was Mrs. Pitts. Mrs. Pitts was the Pitts, but she was a marvelous mathematician. Very, very good teacher. Not a good teacher for me, though. I remember when I entered into Miss Pitts' class after having Mrs. Bropes in 11th grade, I was so excited. I loved math. I had Miss Balcom in 10th grade. I don't even know why I remember all my, yes, I do, because I love math. All my math teachers have always helped me engage my love for math, my passion for numbers in 10th grade and 11th grade. But it was only until I got to 12th grade where my 12th grade teacher said, "You're really, really good at math. Did you know that?" I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah." She said, you should work for like a bank or something." And she ended up having a meeting with my mother, again, Virginia Beach, Virginia, and talking about how she would be willing to write a recommendation for me to get a job at Bank of America. A job. You don't take your best mathematician in 12th grade calculus and tell that person to go get a job at Bank of America. You tell them to come to DePaul University. Why is it that my teacher recommended for my best friend Jason, who wasn't as good at math as I was, to go to the University of Virginia, but she told me to work at Bank of America? The quality of the education that you receive is in part dependent upon your race and who you are. Interestingly enough, because life is cool like that, Jason and I preserve our friendship, and we both go to the University of Virginia together. But if it had not been for parents and other teachers really reinforcing this message that I could be academic, that my skills I could do well in college, I could go to college, I could figure out how to pay for it, quite frankly, I wouldn't be your speaker this morning. That in this study, it's also true that many students, almost a quarter of black males, reported being put down, or feeling unsupported by their teachers. In this piece, I talk about a study I did with high-achieving black collegians. It's a sample of black students at predominantly white institutions, like the one at which we are all situated right now, who were on scholarship, having their education paid for, merit scholarships. And interestingly enough, even in this sample of high-achieving black collegians, 88% of them said that they felt pressure to prove themselves academically once already enrolled. Pressure to prove yourself academically. People often look for examples of this. This is a student who's an honors student who still gets in the classroom, and people assume that either they got there through affirmative action or that they're not smart enough to complete the assignment. People who were there on a merit scholarship, top of the, cream of the crop, top of the class, but still feeling the need to prove to their professors that they're serious about their education. This is that burden that I think all of us have a responsibility to try to reduce, if not eliminate, for students. Because one, it's been shown in social psychological research that what it does is it diverts attention away from the academics. Most psychologists know this phrase called, it's really a working memory. We all have a working memory. And if you're multitasking right now, you're drawing on your working memory. It's like whenever you've had 4 or 5 different apps open on your computer. Now, if it's a PC is going to breathe really hard and act like it's going to shut down. But a Mac, can handle 4 or 5, apps being open at a time. But regardless, both of these machines, when they have 4 or 5 apps open, are working really hard to make sure that there's no loss to the functionality of the apps. Also, what frustrates all of us, that there's no loss in terms of the pace at which we can work. We are not machines, but quite often we behave in ways like machines. Machine metaphors become useful for understanding human behavior. And when a student is in a classroom where they are worried about having to prove themselves to their peers and prove themselves to their professor, that is time and energy diverted away from the lecture, away from the test, away from the exam, and there is a detectable loss in terms of their performance. It's what Claude Steele years ago talked about when he said stereotype threat and how stereotypes really activate or undermine the performance of individuals. Once people know that someone in here believes that I'm not supposed to be here, I don't belong here, they start working really hard to prove themselves, and before you know it, that time or energy takes away from their performance. And this brings me to my closing point, and that's why I think my work on belonging has been so important to me. And understanding exactly what we're trying to do in higher education. When I started writing about belonging, I really didn't see belonging as a diversity subject, but in many ways it is. This idea that everyone belongs. Everyone belongs here at DePaul University. Even the student who's struggling academically belongs here. Even the student who can't pay for the education belongs here. Now we had to figure out, there's certainly some decisions that can be made about how to reduce the debt. I'm not saying that, just because you enroll and you can't afford it, you should just pile on piles and piles of debt. But I'm simply saying that to assume that just because a student can't afford it means they're not DePaul University material is false. It is inaccurate. It's unfair. It's undemocratic. That especially we should think about, even at private institutions, think about how do we open up access for segments of our population who have not done it. And then once we have opened up access, the way I talked about earlier, many more students from different racial and ethnic backgrounds, from different sex categories, from different sexual orientations in terms of first generation and continuing generation, once they're here, is to accept that they belong here and that they can succeed. And in the book, I talk about belonging this way. Ultimately, I ground my work on belonging in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow says that we all have basic needs and that there are higher order needs which really map onto our educational mission. DePaul University exists because it's all about producing self-actualized learners and creativity and innovative thinkers and self-authored leaders, all of those things. But the point is this: you'll never get there if we don't first satisfy students' need to belong. Everybody wants to belong. Everybody wants to feel cared about. Everyone wants to feel visible, as if they matter. In fact, in the book, I say that sense of belonging is the shared faith that I matter. I was telling folks at dinner last night, the reason why, part of the psychology behind what took place on your own campus last year or two, and what happened at VCU, and what happened at the University of Missouri, and what happens at UCLA, and what happened at Ohio State, what happens at all universities right now, the psychology behind it is belonging. It's when a speaker comes and speaks, and that message is allowed to go forth in a way as if other people aren't present. And their presence isn't meaningful. Their opinions don't matter. Their presence doesn't matter. Their interest don't matter. Their safety doesn't matter. And all of us respond when we feel like our safety, our security is being threatened. We respond in very visceral ways. The first thing is we try to avoid that feeling. That is, we get up and we try to get out of this space, or if we can't, then we try to protect our safety and security. And sometimes we do this through protest, sometimes we do this through argument, sometimes we do this in lots of different ways, through hunger strikes, through campus marches, through organizing. There are lots of different ways in which it's done on campuses. And what it helps us do is, if nothing else, restore this feeling that we matter, because mattering is so essential to who we are. In fact, I have a shirt that says "You Matter." I should have worn it today. But, and there are 4 dimensions of mattering. We feel like we matter when we know that we are important, and we feel that sense of importance. We also know that we matter when we experience what's called ego extension. Ego extension is if you're in a significant relationship or if you have a bestie. Besties always can help us understand ego extension. Ego extension is when you experience yourself in someone else. It's when your good days become their good days, your bad days become their bad days. It's when you can call up that best friend and say, "Oh my gosh, I cannot stand my boss," and your best friend says, "I hate your boss too." They don't even know your boss. They've never met them. But you start saying, "Oh my gosh, they came in my office and you won't believe what they told me." They're like, "Oh my gosh, let me hear. I know, you know what? That boss is going to make me come down there and give them a piece of my mind." They know that they cannot even get to where you work in any period of time that's rational. But best friends don't worry about that. They step right into that space and help you understand, like, "I'm in your corner. I understand. I'm here to hear you out. I believe what you're saying. I'm here to support you." Students feel a sense of belonging when they feel like they matter. They feel like they matter when they experience this on our campuses. Faculty, staff, programs, and policies that reinforce, "I see you, No, I'm sorry, that's the actual phrase. No, I got you. Just so happy, she was showing me my time and I said, I see you. She thought I was talking to you. It's actually the phrase I was saying to the audience, right? So I see you, you matter, it's important, and I'm here to support you. Now we got to do the heavy lifting, and that is, what does that look like in terms of policy and programs? What are those that really signal to all students, we're here to support you? Several years ago, I did a study in a school where I asked, wasn't intended to do this study, I was there to do some grant work, but I realized there were some issues in the school, so I launched a small study where I asked teachers, generally speaking, what do you think your students believe you're here to do for them? Take out a sheet of paper and just write it down. And then I went to their students, and I asked their students, when you think of your teachers, what do you think of your teachers can do for you? What do you think they're here to do for you? Write it down. And I created a slide that juxtaposed the two of these. And before you know it, you would see the teachers would say things like, I'm here to help, teach, educate, support, inspire. And many more comments on the student side who would say things like, here to hurt, get me in trouble, get on my nerves, talk down to me, control me. Words that don't automatically signal bad things until you start thinking about what does that mean, control of a human, control of a body. So I think it helps us understand that if we're going to really maximize belonging, create spaces where all students feel like they matter and they are visible, it really requires us to understand our students, to know our students, and help them know that we're here to support them. Mattering and belonging matter. I mean, this is a university that uses this on their college application website. By the way, I was telling Ruben last night at dinner, I just finished the second edition of that book. In the second edition of that book, I put together a lot of these kind of screenshots. I counted over 200 universities in this country that use the phrase, you belong here, on their application website, which is interesting, it's curious, but it's also an interesting notion. Why? Because I hope that the student who applies to that institution after you tell them on the site, you belong here, gets to experience a campus where they actually feel that sense of belonging. Nothing can be more damaging than a student being sold a promise, told you belong here, and then get there and feel invisible, feel looked over, feel as if they're not cared about. And it wouldn't be me if I didn't close with a story. So this is my maternal grandmother. My mom's mom. In fact, if you look at this, that first date is the day she was born. You know, we just passed that date. I remember that date. I was in Ohio giving a keynote at a conference full of admissions officers. I cried my eyeballs out that day because this is my grandmother. My grandmother, my mom's mom, is the one who helped raise me. I would spend all summers with my grandmother. My grandmother was the one who helped me understand that belonging really does matter, and that all of us can play a role in shaping the extent to which we feel like we matter, we belong. You do play a role. Quick story, my grandmother was a choir director. I'm a choir director, so sometimes when I'm directing my choir, I start tearing up because I think, oh wow, I'm doing the very same thing my grandmother used to do years ago. My grandmother was a choir director, and I was a member of her choir. Now this is cool because you don't have to go that far for choir rehearsal, but the other part is choir rehearsal can happen at any time. Sometimes it happened at breakfast, sometimes it happens in the shower. I mean, my grandmother would just tell me on demand, sing a song. I was telling Sarah about this morning. Well, I remember being 7 years old, my grandmother was making breakfast. She said, hey, Rel, I want to teach you a song to sing. I said, Ma, I don't sing. I hadn't sung a song yet. She said, well, this song you might need to know. This one is my favorite song. She gave me the words to the song. It's this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. And then my grandmother sang it while flipping pancakes and frying bacon. I don't cook, so I guess that's what you do. Do you fry bacon? You do something to bacon. She was doing that to the bacon. And then she turned to me, she said, now it's your turn to sing. And I said, oh, no, I don't want to sing. And my grandmother said, well, if you don't sing, you're not going to eat. That's the kind of grandmother I had. And so I decided I wanted to eat and live so I could be your speaker today. And so I decided at 7 years old, I'd go ahead and sing. And like most stubborn 7-year-olds, what I decided to do was just mumble it, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Whoa, right? She let me get through the whole song. And my grandmother turned to me and she said, you sound terrible. But you should practice because you never know when you're going to need that song. Well, a couple Sundays later, my grandmother was at church. She was directing the choir. She turned to the pastor. She said, "Hey, pastor, can I do something different this morning with the choir?" He said, "Miss Warner, you can do whatever you want to do." She said, "All right, church, I want you to put your hands together for my grandson who is coming up here to sing." It had been weeks since she taught me that song. And I thought, my brother is here? I didn't even know my brother was here. And I'm looking around for him, and it's not my brother, it's me. She's calling for me to come up. I'm like, no. She's like, "Get up here." So I get up in front of these people, and I do what most 7-year-olds who are unprepared for the moment would do. I start crying. And when I started crying, the cool thing about being 7 and crying is this: everybody stood up and clapped and said, "Oh, poor baby." I don't know if after I was introduced this morning, if I got up here and started crying, would you stand up for me? Probably not. So I got up there and I said, "I don't remember the words." My grandmother got close enough to me where no one in the church could hear her, but I could hear her. And she started whispering the words. Proximity is important. She starts whispering the words, and as I'm getting the words, I'm like, "But I don't remember how it goes." And she starts humming it to role model it for me. It was at that moment that I realized my grandmother really cares about me. And then my grandmother said, "Baby, close your eyes and sing for mama." She gave me the words, she role modeled for me, and then she told me, "Close my eyes, you can do it." And I remember, for some reason, daring to listen to my grandmother, being 7 years old. I probably had on this blazer after that. And so I remember closing my eyes. And the cool thing about this is the moment I closed my eyes, I was transported right back into that kitchen where she was teaching me the song. I could smell the bacon. I could hear the sizzle of the fry. And though I had never sang a day in my life, I remember closing my eyes. And I closed my eyes in front of all 67 people at her church and said, "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine." Listen. One day I was in my office reading about self-efficacy and thinking about how self-efficacy connects to belonging. And I broke down into tears and realized my grandmother knew the research about self-efficacy. There are 3 levers for raising people's confidence in their ability to ride a bike, to text on a cell phone, or to feel a sense of belonging in a college environment. One is verbal persuasion, simply telling them you can do it. It can happen for you. If you don't believe me, listen to this person who has it. Second is role modeling or vicarious experiences, putting them around people who have done it or showing them images of people who have done it. And then third and finally, mastery experiences, telling them, "Give it a chance, give it a try. I'm here to support you," just like my grandmother did it for me that day. I think if we can pull these 3 strategies together, in addition to the things we're going to share later, we will ultimately create college environments, even here at DePaul University, where all students feel a sense of belonging. Thank you.